to make this long story short,
Mm.
the two women were using this cover up of a threesome, which allowed their lesbian relationship to stay, to remain, and to survive for over 50 years until one of them died. And to me, I love this idea of the women being in control, using their wiles to survive against this idea of, as you said, toxic masculinity from the alpha male.
Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Andrew. I am so excited to let you all know that we are now in the top 40 best liberal arts podcasts list that got sent to me, and we're number 3. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. And I just really appreciate that you keep spreading the word. So please make sure you follow us on social media. Instagram is Ivory Tower Boiler Room, TikTok, Dr. Rimby, and please review us on Apple, Spotify. It really, all of it helps. So I hope you just enjoy this episode. And as always, remember, there is an ad-free version on our Patreon. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Welcome back to a gay and lesbian review. You know how much I love doing these and seeing Jeremy back in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So we're here for the July and August issue, which is all about artists who are inspired by the places they live in, and of course, very homoerotic art, as can be expected. So I really am excited to introduce each of the contributing writers who we've assembled here. I mean, first, everyone, Jeremy C. Fox is the managing editor of the Gay and Lesbian Review. Oh,
Editor-in-chief.
editor-in-chief, managing editor. Okay. Uh,
I
I'll edit
was,
that
but I
out.
got a promotion.
See, there we go.
Yay.
So, Jeremy C. Fox, editor-in-chief of the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, and I'm joined with Ignacio Darnaude, who's a returning guest. You could look up, he was on here talking, you know, in a really exciting profile way. But Ignacio, his article's called A Very Queer Arrangement in the issue. He's an art historian whose ongoing project, which I remember from the beginning, and it's amazing to see how it's grown. On Instagram, it is at Breaking the Gay Code in Art, which explores queer narratives hidden within art history. So welcome back, Ignacio.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And then I'm joined with Randy Blakely, who Randy is a Chicago writer and attorney whose work centers on labor and employment law within the municipal sector, civil rights, and administrative governance, who talks about the artist Clifford Prince King and Black queer manhood. So welcome to the podcast, Randy.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And then James Cahill uh, is back. Well, not back, but here for the first time. I'm very excited. James is the author of The Violet Hour. Uh, is it Typolo Blue?
Tiepolo, I think.
Tiepolo Blue. Okay. And the forthcoming book, The Beverly Hills Housewife. I'm immediately going into my Bravo Housewives brain, but a little different. The Beverly Hills Housewife, Hockney's Californian Muse and the World Beyond the Pool. So his article in the issue is called Swimming Pools Movie Stars, all about David Hockney. So welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you.
So right away, I know, Jeremy, I always like to have a framing question. So, what was it about this issue in particular that excited you with artists who, are creating work that's really inspired by the place they're in and how that helps their queer aesthetic?
Well, this is a really special issue for me personally. I was very excited to assemble it. I was an art major as an undergraduate. I have a degree in oil painting, actually, which is one of the many really practical decisions I've made in my life. And a couple of the artists in this issue were people who influenced me and people whose work really means a lot to me. David Hockney is somebody who, like James, I was first introduced to as a teenager, and when I hadn't come out yet, and I was still sort of figuring myself out. And his work, which is homoerotic, but it's also, especially his early work, is a lot about longing and about connection and about trying to build a bond with another man. And when we had the opportunity to work with James, who has already written one book about Hockney, has another one coming out very soon, it was just such a treat to get to do that. And then William Benneman wrote a wonderful piece about John Singer Sargent, who was also an artist who means a lot to me, an artist who I am lucky enough to be sort of surrounded by his work since I live in Boston. And they have amazing Sargent paintings at both the Museum of Fine Arts and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, but also his work is in the Boston Public Library and other public buildings. And William Benneman is a stalwart of the review, has written many wonderful pieces for us, and delved into an area that I was curious to know more about and hasn't been written about that much, although it's been being explored more and more, how he found and worked with some of the male models who were featured in his erotic work. And then Randy introduced me to the artist Clifford Prince King, whose work I was not familiar with at all before. And it was fascinating to see his work and see his depictions, which are it is still a somewhat rare subject matter. The idea of what we're terming like Black queer manhood. It really explores an aspect of the community that is sort of underexplored, underdepicted, underreported on. And we were very fortunate to be able to get in touch with Mr. King and use one of his photographs on the cover, which I think made for a fantastic cover. And then Ignacio also brought me a story that was completely unfamiliar. I knew the artist Stanley Spencer since I had studied art. He is one of the most prominent British painters of the early 20th century, and I knew his painting of himself with his wife Patricia Priest. And as far as I was concerned, that was kind of where the story ended. And Ignacio let us know that there is a lot more to the story, and Patricia Priest was his wife really in name only. And it's really a fascinating story, and I look forward to hearing Ignacio talk a little bit more about it. So I'm going to stop talking and let other people take the floor.
Well, no, bravo. Editor-in-chief, job well done. I mean, to synthesize all of that together. Yes, Ignacio is going to talk about a dysfunctional menage a trois, which will be fascinating. Well, I wanted to jump first, just James, because like the idea of David Hockney, I mean, a lot of viewers of the magazine, if you look up David Hockney, I think a lot of his artwork will be recognizable, especially the Beverly Hills, the Hollywood aesthetic. So maybe let's start there, because that's really what your article digs into, that inspiration with, him moving to sunny, Hollywood. What was it? What have you learned about his aesthetic? Like, why Hollywood? Like, what was it about the movie stars, the landscape that really helped fuel his imagination?
Oh gosh, I mean, all sorts of things. Hollywood was in his blood. It was somehow in his soul from an early age. He, as a child, was fascinated by Hollywood. His dad used to take him as a young boy in Bradford, in Yorkshire, in the 1940s to cinemas where they would see Hollywood films. And he became entranced as a boy with the sort of the light, this incredible crystalline light that he saw in the movies. And then later, when he was a student still in London, he was introduced to certain homoerotic magazines like Physique Pictorial, The Young Physique. This was the nearest you could get really to mainstream gay pornography, and they all issued from California. So this again held out a certain promise of LA as a gay utopia. And he finally went there in early 1964, and he knew in advance he was going to love it. And there's this famous account he gives of flying down into the city over the San Bernardino Mountains and being fascinated by the look of the small turquoise pools that he saw from a distance. And those, of course, within a year or two became his great motif. And so he knew he would love LA, and so it proved. I also feel myself that if you think you're going to love Los Angeles, you will do. It somehow conforms to your expectation, and vice versa. If you think you're going to hate it, you probably will. But David actually said later it was 3 or maybe 10 times better than he expected it to be. And I think what he found there was a new kind of freedom. He'd had relative freedom as a student in London in what he called the bohemia of the Royal College. Certainly he'd begun to explore his sexuality in the work that he made, but LA offered a whole different level of sexual freedom. There was the parade of beautiful bodies on the beach that was very appealing to him. And it did herald this new, very crystalline, lucid style, to go back to the question of his aesthetic and how LA changed that. It transformed it. He began to make work that was much more about real life, I suppose. If his previous work had been very much about his interior and longing, as Jeremy was saying, what he did in LA was turn his focus outward to the architecture of the city, the palm trees, the look of the place. He actually said later that he felt on first arriving, that the city needed its Piranesi, it needed its chronicler, its documenter, and that could be him. And so he began by making these quite generic paintings of LA streets and signs and houses. But before long, he became more interested in people. And initially that was beautiful boys floating on lilos in pools, and they didn't have names or identities. But he did gradually become more interested in actual nameable individuals, which is the starting point for my book, because Betty Freeman, the woman in that Beverly Hills housewife picture, was one of the first real life people that he depicted.
It feels very, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of like Sunset Boulevard and like that image that so many of us, like, to me, LA is the city of fantasy. Like you said, if you go in with a certain image, you can have it. It can conform to whatever you want from it, as like, the sound stages, the like palm trees. I mean, Ignacio is an LA person, so I'm sure Ignacio from experience.
Well, I think it felt like a mirror image of his own spirit and his own youth, in fact. He was in his mid to late 20s when he went. He was on the brink of what many people consider his greatest phase in terms of the work he made there. And I guess the city itself felt young, and in many ways it was. It still is. It's not a new city. So there wasn't a great precedent there. And actually, he felt that the whole place was a blank canvas. There weren't many, well, certainly not many well-known representations of LA, although people like Ed Ruscha admittedly were making what became very iconic representations of LA as well. But to David, it was like no one had depicted the city before, and it only really existed in either movies or maybe a novel like John Raichie's book City of Night, which admittedly gives you a much darker, more noirish sort of picture of LA. But he felt that it was an open field in terms of being represented.
Well, and it's so interesting, contributor to the magazine, Andrew Halloran, frequent contributor, dancer from the dance. I just think there's this one cover that really, to me, speaks David Hockney, like with the image of the boy in the pool. I mean, so was there a specific genre of film that David Hockney was really interested in, James, like from this Hollywood landscape?
I don't know if there was particularly. I think he was pretty omnivorous, and they, in a way, they got what they were given in wartime or post-war Bradford in terms of what was put on. But often it was quite vintage stuff. He would definitely have seen Sunset Boulevard. One film that he often mentioned in later life was Laurel and Hardy's Big Business, where they play a pair of sort of hapless Christmas tree salesmen. But what he remembered, I think, more than or as well as the plots and the goings on was, as I said before, the look. Although it was black and white, you have these amazing hard-edged shadows, this sense of the hard light and the crisp shade of Los Angeles, and that was something he was chasing and looking for when he went there. But I guess I should point out that he didn't completely romanticize it, or he didn't have a solely romanticized view of Los Angeles, and he was disabused of his very romantic notions of it, I guess, because when he first went, within a few weeks, he visited the head office or the headquarters of Physique Pictorial, which was downtown. It was run by that photographer, well-known photographer, pioneer of beefcake, called Bob Miser. And David always remembered how sort of crummy and seedy the whole operation was when he got there. Even though it was the source of these photographs of young men in sort of, Eden-like settings, actually it turned out to be a fairly kind of dirty pool with stained sides and kind of tacky Greek-style statues around the perimeter. And Bob Miser was known for hiring young guys straight out of the city jail and this kind of thing. So the whole thing had a slightly sort of unappealing aspect to it, which also showed a different side to LA. So I think which he also appreciated.
Well, and I had Rashid Newson, the author, on the podcast recently, and his book, There's Only One Sin in Hollywood. I mean, I feel like this is a nice transition into what you're doing, Randy, which is, I talked a lot with Rashid about Moonlight, which isn't LA, it's Miami, but Miami, LA, tropical theme.
Tomato.
Yeah. So both places I really like. What was it, Randy? How did you discover first the work of Clifford Prince King? Why does anything exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? I think that's a question we all, as curious people, have asked ourselves. And let me tell you, Professor Stephen A. Simon's new book is so thought-provoking that I can't wait for you all to pick it up. He provides his experience as a professor of political science and philosophy to explore that question with such a variety of perspectives from science, religion, philosophy, and even mathematics. He helps us understand what could possibly explain the most fundamental fact of all, that anything exists. So you can get this from broadviewpress.com. The floodgates have opened with science fiction as a genre in my life because I owe this to my husband, and I'm going to give him credit. He has really gotten me to think more about sci-fi, film, and literature. I have to say, Minority Report, absolutely amazing. And Alien, I mean, who doesn't love that alien coming out of that human body in the first film? So Professor Jason Haslam's new anthology provides a lot of exploration with all different short fiction. So many sci-fi authors, over 200 years, including sci-fi that explores indigenous futurism, feminist science fiction, Afrofuturism. Again, you can get this on broadviewpress.com. And last but not least, my upcoming episode with Professor Matthew James Wachinsky explores his book, which is Original Inquiry, A Guide to Research for Undergraduates, a great toolkit for all faculty out there who are just trying to find a book that helps their students understand how to collect research sources and then, right, the hardest part, build and organize their essay with all of these sources and to make a cohesive argument. I can't recommend Original Inquiry highly enough. So again, all three books can be found on broadviewpress.com. Use the promo code Ivory Tower for 20% off.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I wish I had like some profound story, like I majored in art, like Jeremy or something, or like I went to an art gallery and saw his work. Honestly, it was just pretty simple. I just typed in black gay male photographers in Google, and then I just saw like several different images, and there was just one that stuck out at me. It was the portrait entitled Track Star, and it just really like I was really drawn in on it. It was just all of the different um, imageries and different things in the photo that I just instantly noticed and connected with. I think specifically like the Jesse Owens photo on the wall. I used to run track, and so that really like drew my attention. And then just like seeing this black guy in this kind of like empty apartment, ironing his clothes, getting ready to work, trying to like almost make his stake in this country, and just trying to survive. It just really resonated with me. And so I just kind of went from there. Like I essentially just wrote like our initial draft just on the imagery of all the imageries and symbolisms that I saw in that piece, and sent it to Jeremy. And then Jeremy was, gave me really great feedback, and he was just like, like I want to see more of, King's work. Like, could you, find some other photos and, dive deep into that? And so I did. And I just, the more pictures I saw, the more I fell in love with his work. And like, I just felt like, his work embodies like a conversation about generations of Black men. I know that, Jeremy initially mentioned that, Black gay, I guess, gay male photography is kind of like a rare subject matter. And I think, like, for me, I felt like King almost kind of combats that. Well, I think that's a very accurate statement. He almost kind of combats that by saying in his work is like, like we're not, you know, Black men don't necessarily like it's not about Black men deserving humanity. Like we already possess it. And I think his photographs are essentially like trying to explain that Black queer men, to the world, and that we're allowed to just simply exist. And so, like, he has images of like two Black men kissing, like in a field, and just like I like there's another portrait of like two Black, like a three or four Black men in the room, and they're just kind of laying on each other with a glass of wine, and Martin Luther King in the background. And so just like all these juxtapositions of like Black men and then Black queer men, and the similarities between the two, trying to survive and thrive in this country, but also just being unapologetically, Black and queer and existing. And so I think that what really drew me into his work. I think he just has, a very great eye, and it's almost kind of just like candid photos. Like it's not something that is like almost like rehearsed. It's just like natural, candid like photos of Black queer men existing. And I think that is something that is not often seen. And I really enjoyed writing the piece. I really enjoyed observing all of the different imageries in each of his pieces. And so I just that's basically the story in a nutshell.
Yeah.
If
Well,
I could jump in for just a second, I think it's really interesting to think about King's work as we're also thinking about Hockney's work, because there are some real similarities. Both of them have a certain fairly minor percentage of works that we would describe as overtly homoerotic. Others are maybe somewhat suggestive, but a lot of their work is about longing, about finding your place, about identity. And it was really interesting, and I'm really thankful to Randy for introducing me and our readers, who I assume many of them don't know King. He's a relatively young guy, I think maybe late 30s or something,
Mhm.
and he's not super famous yet, but I think it's a very interesting body of work because it does capture so much about the experience of being someone like him, and I'm not, obviously, so it's a window into that kind of experience if you're a middle-aged white guy like I am.
Well, and I also wanted to bring up that, definitely I want each of you, after I talk to Ignacio, to talk about queer joy and representation, because I feel like, Randy, you're really hitting something about the queer Black body being celebrated and it not being suffering, or like
Mhm.
this trope of it having to be, under duress, which, obviously there's historical realities. I don't want to discount that. And also, you know, James too, with all you're doing with Hockney, who I do want to mention, we sadly lost in 2026. Um, Randy, as Jeremy was saying, your photographer, Clifford Prince King, is alive. So I am curious, Randy, have you had conversations recently with Clifford?
I haven't, but I would love to though. I mean, yeah, I mean, he just really, I just felt very connected to his work. I've been out since 17 and I never had that experience of being closeted. Like, I feel like I kind of bloomed, I guess, late in the sense of just like exploring sexuality or,
Mhm.
figure out what I was attracted to. And, when I realized I was attracted to men, that's it. And I've always been my authentic self, which is a gay man, a gay person. I've never tried to present myself as any different. And like even just over the years from college on up, I often found myself gravitating toward or having like gay men who were questioning themselves gravitate towards me. And I've had friends later in life say like just watching you just be your authentic self and still dealing with adversity and ostracism by you just being yourself really influenced them and inspired them. And so I think that that ties into me with his King's body of work, where it's just kind of existing and not being afraid to exist and be black and queer in this country. And so I really appreciated the kissing in public. Like that's something that can kind of be like a taboo issue within the black gay or queer community, where public displays of affection is not always something black gay men feel comfortable doing. And so just being unapologetically our authentic selves and who just happen to be black and gay, like I really identify with that, and it really just resonated with me. So I really love how like just the ordinary like Google search became like an unexpected, almost like artistic discovery
Mhm.
that really connected with my journey being a black queer man in America.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Randy. And I do want to ask James, um, because you've worked so long with David Hockney, did you talk to David? And if you did talk with him, did that help inspire any of your interpretations of his work?
Well, I was very fortunate to meet David just last year when
Oh, wow.
he had his incredible large-scale retrospective at the Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, and that was a very wonderful occasion. And it was very wonderful to meet him and speak with him. And I actually wrote for that exhibition as well, which was partly how I came to be there. Um, but he was very frail by then, and so when it came to writing the Beverly Hills Housewife, my decision there actually was to make it much more, in a way, a form of response by me to a particular painting. And David comes into it in many ways because his early life in California is talked about in that book, and I retell that story and use quite a lot of the accounts that he gave of it in his book from the 1970s, David Hockney by David Hockney. But in the end, I wanted it to be more a book about a particular painting and using that painting as a lens through which to think about various things, actually, not just David in LA, but actually, possibly even more importantly in the book, the life and the persona of the woman in that painting. She was called Betty Freeman. And although she was she was a Beverly Hills housewife when David painted her in 1966, she became this extraordinary patron of the arts in the 1970s and 80s, and a very formidable patron of experimental music. She held these wonderful salons at her house all through the 1980s. And so there's a story there to be told about who that woman became and who she was, because by calling the painting Beverly Hills Housewife, no one ever knew who she actually was.
And you're giving an identity. And in your new book, bringing that to light. I think that's really fabulous.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing to add is it was her idea to call it Beverly Hills Housewife. She had a strange, slightly self-effacing nature, and she didn't want her name to appear. She liked the idea of just being this cipher, this type. And interestingly, actually, that painting does sort of mark the moment where he was progressing from generic types, people who could be anybody, to actual real people. So she's on a knife edge between the two, but she liked the idea of being anonymous. It suited her. But I do actually mention, Andrew, you mentioned at the very beginning, the Bravo TV franchise, The Housewives. That does come into the book at the end, because to me, although there's no direct line of continuity between them, it does appear as if that painting could be the long progenitor in terms of the way it presents the housewife there at the center of her sort of domestic universe as this figure of enchantment and mystique. And also thinks about how the persona of a housewife could be simultaneously quite restrictive and at the same time potentially quite liberating. So I do discuss that at the end of the book.
Oh, well, that's exciting. Yes, I'm a Bravo TV fanatic, and I analyze it on the podcast sometimes. Yes, the influencer culture, I think, has made the whole concept of a housewife very fascinating, especially if you've seen the new Euphoria season, which, lots of thoughts about that, but there's a lot of OnlyFans narrative with a housewife, with Sydney Sweeney's character. So interesting, a gig economy happening. Well, jumping back now, right? From contemporary to 1960s to now the British modernism period. I mean, talk about a literary salon, Ignacio. The Bloomsbury Group, I think, is quite an interesting salon of sorts. Can you bring us into this, just the historical moment that you're describing here with this menage a trois? Like, what's going on with what you've researched, Ignacio, and what fascinated you about it?
Well, it's a long story, but my entry point to the story is similar to Jeremy, in that I'm very familiar with the work of Stanley Spencer, who is probably one of the most important British artists of the 20th century. And I was particularly fond of one of his paintings, a double portrait of himself with his wife, Patricia Priest, who is nude. And there were two things about that painting that always intrigued me. One, it was painted the day that they got married, but the painting was not about sexuality or romance. It was the opposite. It's a painting that showed anger and frustration. So I was kind of intrigued by that. And I also knew that Patricia Priest was a lesbian. Because, in all my research for my project Breaking the Gay Code in Art, she's always been there with her partner, Dorothy Hepworth. So there were two things that were gnawing at me. I'm like, okay, there's something not right in this painting. But I didn't get into it. There are so many stories to get into. But then, like a year and a half ago, there was an exhibition at Charleston, the Bloomsbury house where many of them lived, about Dorothy Hepworth and Patricia Priest, that kind of started to uncover their story. And then there was a show in London, also with the same theme, and a great book came out called The Secret Art of Dorothy Hepworth, aka Patricia Priest. So I said to myself, okay, I need to get into the rabbit hole. I know it's going to take me a while, but this is worth it. So I got into it. And boy, there was a story there for the ages, really.
Well, and you had told me that, like, in your opinion, how did you come to this understanding that this whole like threesome was a cover? Because you actually found out that Stanley Spencer had quite a toxic masculine point of view.
Completely. And that's what makes the story literally movie worthy. So to tell you a little bit about their lives. So Dorothy and Stanley were artists. Sorry, Dorothy and Patricia were artists, and they met at the London Slade School of Art. And from the very beginning, what I love about them is that they were really breaking the rules. I mean, there was a curfew at school, but they spent the nights at the in one bedroom. So from the very beginning, they were, in fact, they were together for 50 years until one of them died. Um, but this was a difficult time. They when they left school, they went to Europe, like many artists did, and then they lived together in a little cottage. But the first time they really tried to get something together as a home, they were rejected because they were a lesbian couple. And to put it in context, this is England. And at the time, the British Parliament was discussing the idea of penalizing lesbian relationships. And what I found funny, if not laughable, is that they discussed it and they said, "Oh, this is the most gross thing," but they decided not to penalize it to avoid giving any ideas to women. So I thought that was the most hysterical thing, but it's important to contextualize their environment. So they were together, and they were very different. Dorothy was the most artistic one. She was shy. She was reserved. Patricia was the tall one, the charismatic, the one that men flocked around her. And what happened in a moment that really is in a moment that is really extraordinary is Patricia went to see Roger Fry, one of the key members of the Bloomsbury Group, to show their work.
Hmm.
And Roger Fry assumed that the work that she was presenting was her work, Patricia, not Dorothy's. And Patricia, at that moment in time, made a decision that really changed her life, which is, I am not going to correct Roger Fry. I'm going to pretend that these are my paintings, Patricia's. So she goes home, she tells the story to Dorothy, and Dorothy is okay with that. Because like I say, she's like, I'm shy. It's fine for you to be the cover. Meanwhile, Roger Fry is telling everybody how he's discovered this major talent. And that's what the story begins. The fact that Patricia was the artistic face of the couple, but she wasn't doing the work. It was Dorothy. But what I find fascinating going back to the Bloomsbury Group is they were adjacent to the Bloomsbury Group. In fact, Roger Fry promoted them, Clive Bell promoted them, Vanessa Bell promoted them, Virginia Woolf tried to get a major commission, a portrait commission from Patricia. But of course, they couldn't do it because that would have completely uncovered the hoax. I mean, how extraordinary is that? And I find it interesting that Dorothy and Patricia didn't reveal their story to Bloomsbury because Bloomsbury Group was very famous for their sexual liaisons. I mean, Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant were a couple of sorts. So I don't know why they were not open about it, but that's beside the point. But just when they were established, their hoax was going on, they were having shows. Then Stanley Spencer, who goes to one of the shows in a little cafe, he likes what he sees and he invites them, the two women, for a picnic. And that's when the whole thing starts. So Stanley Spencer, who is married, starts inviting Patricia to pose for him. A little by little, he gets completely infatuated with Patricia. He paints nudes of her, and Stanley tells his wife, Hilda, that he deserves both women because that's the least he can get from his extraordinary work. So I love this idea of the delusional toxic masculinity that Stanley Spencer is having. But so at this point, it's kind of a menage a quatre because even Hilda knows about this. And it gets to a point, I mean, Dorothy's not happy about it, but Patricia says it. We need this. Stanley is opening doors for us. Dorothy and Patricia stopped getting the family money that they were getting, so they needed the financial stability. So little by little, this progresses, and Stanley proposes marriage to Patricia, and she accepts. And again, it's out of survival. And the photograph of their wedding is so amazing because it encapsulates the whole story. You see Stanley next to Patricia, next to Dorothy, who is kind of frowning about the whole thing. But from the very beginning, this was a disaster. Dorothy and Patricia left the day after for a 6-week holiday vacation, and Stanley stayed in town. Stanley and Patricia never lived together. And in fact, now we understand the painting that he did the year of their marriage is expressing his frustration for the lack of sexual consummation, that it never happened. So to make this long story short, the two women were using this cover-up of a threesome, which allowed their lesbian relationship to stay, to remain, and to survive for over 50 years until one of them died. And to me, I love this idea of the women being in control, using their wiles to survive against this idea of, as you said, toxic masculinity from the alpha male.
No, thank you for that history. And something that you and, James have brought up, and also Randy, I mean, amplifying and centering Clifford's work is this idea of the patronage, like the patron of the arts. I mean, James talked about it specifically with, the housewife with Betty who starts to support David's work. But I'm just curious how you each weigh in on specifically amplifying queer artists' work, and then especially if they get into the erotic realm, which, could definitely close doors if you don't have someone backing you and your artwork. So I guess I could start with James, like this idea of the patronage, like how important was that, do you think like without even Betty's support, would David have had a hard time having his work shown? Or not just Betty, but other patrons that he relied on? Looking for summer reads, the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine that features arts and culture conversations about the LGBT community, has you covered. The July and August issue is all about summer getaways and artists. So, for example, there are articles about David Hockney. There's an article about the sculpture in Central Park that some of you, if you've seen Angels in America, definitely recognize, by Emma Stebbins. So I can't wait for you all to get your hands on this issue. As always, there are TV reviews, film reviews, book reviews, theater reviews. So if you just don't know where to begin with LGBTQ literature, this is a great magazine to inspire you to add more books to your to-be-read pile. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review, and I'm so happy because I have a promo code for you. Go to glreview.org and get the print subscription or the digital subscription and put in ITBR choice for a free issue of the magazine.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Well, you know, David, in many ways, was very blessed. He was very lucky. He was successful from a young age, a really young age. You know, when he was still at the Royal College of Arts, before he went to the US, he was already selling his work and doing rather well. You know, the British fashion photographer Cecil Beaton bought one of his early works. And so things were really taking off for him by the time he got to Los Angeles. And he was building a network of collectors in LA. That's how he came to meet Betty Freeman. He went to her house with his British dealer, a guy called John Casmin, who's still with us. David and John would tour the homes of wealthy collectors in Los Angeles, and David became fascinated by the sort of veneers and furnishings and pools and what have you, and then increasingly, as I was saying before, by the individuals themselves. So he was actively building a network of collectors, and you know, he always succeeded and was lucky. He was fortunate from a young age in having that network, although Betty did not commission that painting, and I have to say she didn't love it when she went to see it in the studio when he was still working on it. In fact, she really hated it. She didn't think she was going to buy it. And she went back several times and then finally decided that she did love it. I think by the time he'd added all the color and it looked actually like her house and her garden, she decided she would snap it up. And so she did. And then it hung in her house for the next 40 or so years and became the backdrop to this whole second chapter in her own life. But look, I think that David, as I say, always has had appeal, really broad appeal. And this goes back to something Jeremy was saying. I think that, you know, there would always have been a market for his, you know, even his gayest work amongst certain kinds of collectors. But actually, a lot of the work is not so overtly homoerotic anyway. Not that matters one way or the other, but I think that it's interesting that there is nonetheless a certain gay sensibility in much of it that could be overlooked. Even in terms of the fascination that you feel, this young man's fascination for a world very unlike his own, his fascination in that painting that I've written about with the older, glamorous, affluent woman in her pink dress. I think there is a certain gay sensibility to this that could escape notice if you didn't look or think about it in the right way. And I talk about that a bit in the book. But I think that this is part of what gives his work a broader appeal anyway, and what has ensured its popularity and certainly its market.
No, thank you. And also, like, I know I love that in Ignacio's background, he has the John Singer Sargent's nude study of Thomas E. McKellar. Yes, he's going to hold it up. Which
G&LR cover.
Yes, it is.
Yes. And I know William Benjamin includes that in his Stripping for Mr. Sargent piece. You know, like using James's term, which I love that phrase, gay sensibility. I mean, here we have, you know, with Sargent's piece, the nude study, homoerotic art right front and center, with also, you know, the queer black body. And what I'm curious about is, you know, turning to you, Randy, is the idea of, like, you were speaking about this, but like, do you also agree with David? Was there anything, you know, with Clifford Prince King's photographs that you were not necessarily erotic in its depiction, but maybe more of like queer sensibility or an aesthetic? Like, you were kind of even talking about the discussion of the track star photograph.
Yeah, I almost think it's a mixture of both, honestly. Like I think his pieces are about being authentic. It's about, you know, amplifying and showcasing what, you know, black gay male life is like. And it's not all about sex, but it certainly is a component of it. And I think it just shows his imagery just shows like black gay men being free and just being who they are. So, the front cover of the publication, the barbershop, there's so many different like, ideas of what that image could have possibly led to. Was it just a peak? Was it just actual engagement of just the man in the seat and the man with the broom? Or is it the one cutting the hair, the one sitting down, and the man? It could have just led to so many different like scenarios. But I mean, I think that he beautifully puts, black gay sexuality and erotica into the forefront in a sensible way and in a way that's unapologetic because, you know, everybody engages in sex and, we see heterosexual erotica all the time. And, why can't we see that with, queer people as well without it being grotesque, without it being, like I don't know, too raunchy. Like it's all his imageries. There are images of, men kissing. There's images of, covering under the sheets. So it's subtle, it's beautiful, but it's still a form of erotica. It's still a form of like, sex, but in a way that is um honest and in a way that, like I said before, he allows us to make a statement that we already possess humanity. We're not asking for it, and I really think that his work speaks to that.
Well, and I also love, like everyone, when you're reading the issue, each article, and in Randy's article, what I love so much is when you do that analysis of the image MLK Day, because like how important also it is that, you know, such a pivotal figure like Martin Luther King Jr. is featured, but also the two men lying and, stretching and just resting, like how Black history can also be read and integrated with this queer sensibility, this queer aesthetic. I think it's so fascinating what you bring to light with Clifford Prince King's photographs. And I'm really curious, Ignacio, what do you make of, like you did bring up Duncan Grant. Um, Duncan Grant, I have his uh, painting, not an original, but I have his painting of the bathers. I'm very into like, bathers, which, maybe my Whitman love too. So Ignacio, like how is maybe even what you're bringing to light in your work with your article, the idea of eroticism? I mean, you talked about the female nude body. Uh, what did you make of this erotic sensibility going on? Like even what we see with Duncan Grant's work.
Well, it's very simple. Duncan Grant, whom I love, I actually have a few of his works, originals, which I'm very proud of having. He idolized the male body, and that's what he did. And Duncan has an amazing story because many people kind of forgot about him. They thought he was dead, and then all of a sudden, they find out this box full of male nudes that he had been painting all along. That are revolutionary for their time and even today, but interracial. So he had a relationship with Vanessa. They loved each other. They even had a child from Vanessa Bell from a part of their only sexual encounter. But he was gay. I mean, and everybody at the Bloomsbury Group knew, everybody supported that. So to your point, he was all about the male nude. So let's move on to Dorothy and Patricia. They are lesbians, and it's all about the female nude. And if you see the paintings by Dorothy, aka Patricia, who is the one signing, you see how beautiful, how tender, how soft they are. And there's one thing that I found out in my research, which was I loved it, which is um, Patricia is the one who kind of did the behind the scenes works. He's the one who got the models and the props, etc. So when Dorothy was painting the female nude, Patricia was lying in a lounge chair next to them with a cigarette, with a very glamorous, looking at the scene, scrutinizing the female nude. I just find that just too beautiful for words. And going back to the toxic masculinity of Spencer, What I love is the fact that Dorothy's work, signed by Patricia, is so soft and beautiful. Meanwhile, when you see the works, the portraits that Spencer did of Patricia nude, they are shocking to this day. They are so raw, so on your face. And I mentioned in the article that it's like probably nothing like since Rembrandt. Nobody since Rembrandt has captured the body in such a shocking way. And I love the contrast between these two figures, how they express their sexuality in their work so overtly.
Mm. Well, and Jeremy, I have to ask you the controversial question as we near the end, as you know. I like a little controversy at the end, which is um, we have articles on, right, John Singer Sargent and also Wilhelm von Gluten. And right, they're relying on either boys or, male nude models. What do you make of, or what can readers expect to find about, the male nude body, especially like when it gets touchy on younger men and maybe the way that these men were found by these artists?
I think it's kind of apples and oranges, Sargent and von Gloden, because we have in the beginning of William Benneman's article on Sargent, we have an adult man who decides to approach Sargent and offer himself up as a male model, with the idea that he very well could be posing nude. And so he has agency. He is making a conscious choice. He hasn't been sought out by anyone. And he recounts this later, and other models who worked for Sargent, who are included in Benneman's article, like they may have had disagreements with him at times, but none of them reports anything untoward. They were treated as well as any model in that time period probably could have expected to be treated. Whereas von Gloden, he was recruiting underage boys, and it's a much more exploitative situation. And I'm thankful to James for highlighting Bob Miser a little bit, because I really feel like von Gloden is sort of the progenitor of Bob Miser and physique pictorial and the visual aesthetic of a lot of, especially Miser's earlier photographs, which because of obscenity laws in the United States at that time, he had to present these men in posing straps or fully nude in a classical setting to try to say this is something artistic and this is something that goes back to the ancients. And that's what von Gloden was doing 50 or so years earlier. And von Gloden's photographs are often beautiful, but if you stop to think very much about how the models were recruited and how much agency they had and how they would be portrayed and who would be seeing them, it's a little bit queasy to go too far down that road. And the article by Nicholas Shepard in the issue is like the central question of it is, how did von Gloden get away with this? How was he able to, bring 10, 12, 14-year-old boys into his studio and photograph many of them over a period of years? You can see them aging and maturing until they get to an age where it's appropriate to be photographing them nude, arguably. And why were there not a lot of Sicilian fathers knocking his door down and, showing up with pitchforks like outside Frankenstein's castle. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, obviously, von Gloden's work looks very different to us today than it would have looked to a gay man, especially, at the end of the 19th or the beginning of the 20th century. We draw a line that didn't often exist in the culture of that time between a naked adult and a naked child. It's sort of fascinating to think about what sort of the rumor mill in Taormina might have been at the time, what the parents whose sons were going off to spend their day at von Gloden's studio were thinking. Whereas, with Thomas McKellar or what's Nico with these adult men who were posing for Sargent, there wasn't really any need to spread rumors, although there's certainly a lot that you can speculate. But Sargent, as far as we know, wasn't trying to sleep with these models, although he may have been thinking a lot about it.
Well, and I think also the controversy around von Gloden, you could also probably question Eakins with the swimming hole and in Philadelphia. Possibly. I'll let someone else do that work. But
there's a book.
Yeah. Yes, there is. And I also do want to mention too, Jay Barnes's, specifically since I'm right outside Manhattan, the Angel of the Waters sculpture, which is atop Central Park's Bethesda fountain. Maybe, when I'm in the city, I'll make sure I stop by it, and maybe I'll bring the magazine with me. So, also learning that history, that the sculpture was done by Emma Stebbins, who was a lesbian, which, I didn't know. And it featuring so prominently in the Angels in America series, I think adds even more of a layer.
Kushner knew.
Yes, Kushner knew. Kushner always knows. Well, this was fabulous. I absolutely love this issue. I think it's art in place. You all are doing so much exciting work here. So, could each of you just, go around and just share if you have an Instagram, a website, anything you want the listeners or viewers to access your work. So, Ignacio, I'll start with you.
Yes. So my Instagram is Breaking the Gay Code in Art, one word. And there on the bio, there is a link tree, and you can see my articles, my lectures, and everything. So it's a one-stop for everything. Breaking the Gay Code in Art.
Thank you, Ignacio. James?
Yeah, of course. My Instagram is James M. Cahill. That's an M for Matthew in the middle. So yeah, please follow me. You can see what I'm up to on that. And my book is out in November. I've got a proof copy here, so I'll show you what it's going to look like, or will look approximately like this. The Beverly Hills Housewife. It's out in November in the States, and I'll be doing some events in New York and also obviously in Los Angeles, because it is very much an LA book.
Oh, wonderful. And then Randy?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My Instagram name is at Sir Blakely, Blakey. And I actually also have a Medium. I'm on the Medium platform where I have some pieces that I write from time to time. My name on there is it's medium.com/at the Blakely Review. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone, right, glreview.org. Follow the Gay and Lesbian Review on Instagram, right, Jeremy? What's the Instagram?
I never remember what it is because we have slightly different handles on every platform.
Here, wait, I got it. It's Gay Lesbian Review on Instagram.
All right. Yes. But we are on Blue Sky and Facebook and even TikTok. We're all over the place. So just search for Gay and Lesbian Review or G&LR and you'll find us. And I am Jeremy C. Fox, consistently across all platforms.
Yes. And use the code ITBR choice for a free issue of the magazine. Print issue, digital issue, all things glreview.org. As always, such a fabulous conversation, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
My
you.
mind is going in all different directions. Okay, bye everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you, Andrew.